in the early days of the pandemic, spring 2020. A lot of people were going crazy looking for yeast to make homemade bread. I didn't have to worry about such things because I was fortunate enough to have my grandmother's Irish soda bread recipe, which uses baking soda, not yeast. Getting the recipe was a bit of a problem. Imagine my Irish grandmother crossing the Atlantic Ocean on a boat 100 years ago. She got here in the 1920s and got a very interesting job. She worked for the Newport elite as their cook. With not much more than an 8th grade education, even if she had that, she had one rule of thumb to keep the Newport people healthy. Put every color on the table and they will be well. As an adult, I later learned that simple rule of thumb was true because every color on the table represented a different vitamin, a different nutrition, and so it was. She kept them healthy. My Irish grandmother, who we called Mamie, cooked everything from scratch, and she never had a single recipe nor a single measuring utensil. I just thought it was magic. How did she know how to cook with no recipes? And then my mother and I were determined to get the recipe. My grandmother would say, "Helene, would you be so kind as to pass me the flour?" And she would just pour it freehand into a larger pot. And then there was the sugar, the salt, and the most important ingredient, baking soda. Baking soda, although a wee little quantity, gave the bread its name. More times than not, Mamie would make her soda bread with regular milk and white vinegar. It didn't matter if it was a gallon of milk or a half gallon of milk, come pouring, cascading out of the container into the ingredients. The other wet ingredients included was beaten with a fork, a stick of butter. For some reason, she always used the land of legs, which I found very funny when I moved to Minnesota. What made my grandmother's Irish soda bread different from anybody else's were 3 special ingredients: caraway seeds, brown raisins, and golden raisins. When I came to Minnesota and discovered that people had bread, Irish soda bread, without those ingredients, I was in shock. That was not Irish soda bread. It was just plain whatever. So, as my grandmother was getting on with age, my mother was determined to get the recipe from a woman who never used a recipe. So one day, she begins with the flour and she pours that into a big bowl, and my mother snatches it from her. And she says, "Oh, Helene, what are you doing?" And she says, "Mother, please, I need to get your recipe." Well, it changes every time depending on the weather, the heat in the kitchen, the humidity of the day. "Mom, I just need something to start with." And my grandmother scolded her for being so silly until my mom said, "Mom, I have to get this recipe or something close to it before you pass away. Otherwise, I'll never be able to make your soda bread." And that is the reason my grandmother acquiesced and allowed my mother and me, oh so many years ago, to get her Irish soda bread recipe. Later on, my mother shared a secret of how to plump up the raisins before putting them in the mix. And she said, put them in a strainer and pour boiling water, and then suddenly these mushed up raisins from a box or package would just plump right up. I have since learned that some Irish do the same thing with whiskey or brandy. Every once in a while, my grandmother would say, we need a wee bit more milk. And she would just pour some in. How do you know? How do you know you need more milk? It's the feel of the bread. I can feel it in my hands. How much is a wee bit? I mean, there was a difference between a wee bit, a little bit, and some more. Whatever the difference was, she knew. We had the basic recipe to which we could add a wee bit, a little bit, a sprinkling, or nothing at all.